In the misty mountains of Hungary, where ancient forests whisper secrets of forgotten times, within the thick walls of Countess Castle, one of history's most horrific secrets lay hidden. The year was 1610, and the winds carried more than just the chill of winter through the stone corridors. At the end of the 16th century, while the screams of young girls echoed in the dungeons of this castle, a countess was performing inhuman rituals to preserve her beauty. This is the story of Erzsébet Báthory, the Blood Countess. The tale of a woman considered one of history's most depraved aristocrats, accused of murdering over 650 young women, believed to have bathed in the blood of her victims for the sake of her own beauty. But was she truly a monster, or was she a victim of political conspiracy? The truth, like blood spilled on castle stones, has seeped deep into history's cracks, leaving only traces of what might have been. August 7, 1560. A daughter is born to one of Hungary's most powerful families, the Báthory dynasty, in the fortress of Nyírbátor, Erzsébet. Her name means God's oath. How ironic, isn't it? The midwives who delivered her spoke in hushed tones about the child's unusual beauty. Skin so pale it seemed translucent, eyes that held an unsettling intensity even in infancy. The Báthory family is not only wealthy but also ruthless. Their coat of arms bears the teeth of a wolf, and this symbolism runs deep in their blood. Erzsébet's uncle, István Báthory, is the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, one of the most powerful men in Eastern Europe. Her family consists of warriors who have built their fortune on the blood of their enemies, politicians who manipulate kingdoms like chess pieces, and some who are also known for their sexual perversions and cruelty. Is it genetics or environment? The question haunts every study of Erzsébet's life. Violence is not just commonplace in Erzsébet's childhood. It is celebrated. Stories circulate of her ancestors' legendary cruelty. Her great-aunt Clara was known to torture servants for entertainment. Her cousin Gabor was infamous for his sexual sadism. The Báthory blood seemed cursed with an insatiable hunger for power and pleasure, no matter the cost. Young Erzsébet is beautiful, extraordinarily beautiful. With her raven-black hair that cascades like liquid night, ice-blue eyes that seem to pierce souls, and porcelain-white skin that appears almost luminescent in candlelight, she resembles a figure from a Renaissance painting. Nobles travel from distant lands just to catch a glimpse of her beauty. This ethereal appearance will prove to be both her greatest weapon and her ultimate curse. The child grows up in an atmosphere of privilege and violence. She witnesses executions in the castle courtyard, watches as her family's enemies are tortured for information, and learns early that power means to inflict pain without consequence. At age 7, she watches a gypsy sewn into a horse's belly for allegedly stealing bread. The sight doesn't horrify her. It fascinates her. At age 11, she becomes engaged to Ferenc Nadasdy, a match that combines two of Hungary's most powerful military families. Ferenc is known as the Black Knight, a title earned through his legendary ruthlessness against the Ottoman forces. A warrior whose reputation for cruelty rivals that of Vlad the Impaler himself, Ferenc has perfected torture techniques that make seasoned soldiers weep. Erzsébet marries at 15 in what becomes known as one of the most lavish weddings in Hungarian history. 4,000 guests attend the ceremony, with festivities lasting for weeks. The wedding gifts include entire villages, thousands of serfs, and enough gold to fund a small war. Marriage is not a prison for Erzsébet. On the contrary, it becomes a laboratory where she begins to discover and refine her darkest impulses. Ferenc is constantly at war, leading campaigns against the Ottoman Empire on the Hungarian frontier. There, on the blood-soaked battlefields, he impales his enemies alive, flays their skin while they still breathe, and sends their heads as messages to enemy commanders. His letters to Erzsébet describe these tortures in graphic detail, and she reads them with growing fascination rather than horror. Meanwhile, Erzsébet, left to rule the vast Nadasdi estates, develops her own hobbies. She begins with small cruelties, ordering servants beaten for minor infractions, having stable boys whipped until they faint. But these mild entertainments soon bore her, and she seeks more elaborate ways to exercise her growing appetite for suffering. The first significant sign occurs with a servant girl named Anna. According to legend, the young servant is somewhat rough while combing Erzsébet's hair, accidentally pulling too hard on a tangle. Erzsébet's reaction is swift and violent. She slaps the girl so hard that Anna's lip splits open, and blood splashes onto Erzsébet's hand and face. At this moment, something profound seems to change in Erzsébet. Staring at her reflection in her silver mirror, she becomes convinced that where the blood touches her skin, her complexion looks brighter, more radiant, more youthful. The servant girl, terrified and bleeding, is dragged away and never seen again. Perhaps it's just imagination, perhaps reality, perhaps the first manifestation of a growing madness. But the obsession has begun. Erzsébet begins experimenting with blood as a cosmetic treatment. She has servants cut so she can collect their blood in silver bowls, mixing it with various herbs and oils. She consults with local wise women and traveling alchemists about the life-preserving properties of virgin's blood. Ancient texts speak of blood's power to restore youth, and Erzsébet becomes convinced that she has discovered the secret to eternal beauty. Ferenc dies in 1604 under mysterious circumstances. The official cause is listed as illness, a fever that consumed him in a matter of days. However, servants whisper that his final illness began after consuming wine that Erzsébet had personally served him. Whether poison or natural causes, Ferenc's death frees Erzsébet from any remaining constraints on her behavior. Now 44-year-old Erzsébet possesses enormous wealth and unlimited power. She controls vast estates across Hungary, owns thousands of serfs, commands private armies, and has access to the treasury of one of Europe's wealthiest families. She has 3 children who are quickly sent away to be educated elsewhere, hundreds of servants who depend on her for their lives, and no one left alive who can hold her accountable for her actions. It is then that the true monster emerges from its chrysalis of respectability. The transformation of Choctich Castle into a house of horrors begins gradually. Education programs for young girls are established at Erzsébet's castle, supposedly to provide finishing school instruction to daughters of the lesser nobility. The curriculum promises lessons in etiquette, languages, music, and the domestic arts befitting a lady of quality. In reality, these girls have walked into a spider's web from which few will ever escape alive. Erzsébet recruits accomplices for her increasingly elaborate schemes. Dorothea Sentes, known as Dorko, is a local wise woman with knowledge of herbs and poisons. Ilona Jo is a wet nurse whose maternal appearance masks a sadistic nature. Katarina Benica serves as Erzsébet's personal maid and procurer of victims. János Újvári, known as Fico, is a dwarf who serves as Erzsébet's torturer and body disposal specialist. Together, they form a cabal of cruelty that will terrorize the region for years. Initially, the torture is relatively simple by medieval standards. Beatings with thorned switches, starvation in underground cells, forcing girls to stand naked in the snow until frostbite sets in. But Erzsébet's appetites grow with feeding, and the rituals become increasingly elaborate and sadistic. She constructs special rooms dedicated to different forms of torture, each designed to maximize both pain and the collection of blood. Erzsébet's favorite method becomes the systematic bleeding of her victims. She develops an intricate ritual. Girls are suspended from the ceiling by their wrists, then slowly cut with silver knives in a pattern designed to keep them alive as long as possible while draining their blood into specially crafted basins below. The blood is then heated and perfumed with exotic herbs before Erzsébet bathes in it by candlelight. Witnesses who survive tell horrific stories. Erzsébet enters a bathtub filled with her victim's blood, lit only by black candles. She lies in this crimson bath for hours, sometimes reading poetry or having music played while young girls die around her. The sight of her pale skin emerging from the red liquid, they say, was like watching a demon rise from hell itself. But bathing in blood is only one aspect of her ritual madness. Sometimes she drinks the blood directly from the wounds, believing that consuming it while warm will transfer the victim's youth and vitality to her own body. She forces other victims to watch these displays, understanding that psychological torture enhances the physical suffering. As her obsession deepens, Erzsébet becomes increasingly creative in her torture methods. She constructs devices specifically designed to maximize suffering, a cylinder lined with spikes that slowly crushes victims while allowing their blood to drain through holes in the bottom. A cage suspended over a fire that slowly roasts girls alive while collecting their rendered fat. An iron chair studded with nails that can be heated red hot while the victim is strapped helpless. Winter provides new opportunities for cruelty. Erzsébet forces girls to stand naked in the snow until their skin turns blue, then has boiling water poured over them to watch their flesh literally cook from the thermal shock. She wreaks Hungarian ice sculptures by pouring cold water over naked victims until they freeze solid, preserving them as decorations for her chambers. And then there is the cannibalism. Yes, Erzsébet begins consuming parts of her victims, believing that eating their flesh will allow her to absorb their youth more completely. She has her cook prepare special meals using the hearts and livers of young girls, seasoning them with rare spices imported from the Orient. She hosts dinner parties where unknowing guests consume human flesh while she watches with barely concealed amusement. The Iron Maiden becomes her signature device, a metal sarcophagus lined with spikes that slowly impales victims while keeping them upright. But Erzsébet's version is modified to include a complex system of tubes that channel the blood into a basin below, allowing her to collect every precious drop while the victim dies slowly over the course of hours or even days. The girls who disappear into Countess Castle come from all walks of life. Initially, Erzsébet targets peasant girls whose disappearance will not be noticed or investigated. She sends recruiters throughout the countryside, offering employment, education, or marriage prospects to lure victims to their doom. Anna Darvulia, a servant in her early 20s, becomes not just a victim, but an active participant in the horrors. Some historians believe she was Erzsébet's lover as well as accomplice, helping to design new tortures and recruit victims. When Anna eventually goes blind, possibly from syphilis, Erzsébet has her murdered rather than care for her disability. The methods of procurement become increasingly elaborate. Erzsébet establishes a network of procurers throughout Hungary and neighboring regions. They offer positions as ladies-in-waiting, promise education or dowries for marriage, or simply kidnap girls from isolated farmsteads. A steady stream of victims flows into Countess Castle, but none ever flows out. As the local supply of peasant girls diminishes, families begin hiding their daughters or fleeing to distant relatives. Erzsébet makes the fatal error that will eventually lead to her downfall. She begins targeting daughters of the minor nobility, girls whose disappearance cannot be easily ignored or explained away. By 1610, rumors about Countess Castle have spread throughout Hungary and reached the ears of King Matthias II himself. Reports speak of ghostly screams echoing from the castle at night, of strange lights and unnatural sounds, of girls who enter the gates and are never seen again. Local priests report that the ground around the castle has been poisoned. Crops will not grow, animals refuse to graze, and even birds avoid flying over the structure. The king faces a delicate political situation. Erzsébet Báthory is not just any noble. She is one of Hungary's most powerful landowners, a member of one of the country's founding families, and a creditor to the crown itself. The Báthory family has lent enormous sums to fund Hungary's wars against the Ottoman Empire, and eliminating Erzsébet could potentially bankrupt the royal treasury. However, the disappearance of daughters from noble families creates pressure that cannot be ignored. King Matthias assigns Georg Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary, and ironically one of Erzsébet's closest friends, to conduct a discreet investigation. Thurzó is torn between his duty to the crown and his personal relationship with Erzsébet, but the evidence he uncovers leaves him no choice but to act. The investigation reveals a network of horror that extends far beyond Čachtice Castle. Evidence emerges of similar activities at Erzsébet's other properties, Sarvar, Lockenhaus, and Keresztúr. Witnesses come forward with stories of torture chambers, mass graves, and rituals that defy comprehension. The scope of the crime suggests that the death toll may reach into the hundreds. December 30th, 1610, the date that will end Erzsébet Báthory's reign of terror. At midnight in the depths of winter, Georg Thurzó leads a raid on Čachtice Castle with a company of soldiers and investigators. They expect to find evidence of crimes, but nothing prepares them for the reality that greets them. The scene they encounter is straight from the depths of hell itself. In the dungeons, they find girls chained to walls, some already dead, others barely alive, their bodies bearing evidence of systematic torture. The walls are covered with bloodstains, some fresh, some so old they have turned black. Dismembered corpses are stacked like cordwood in storage rooms. Jars and tubs filled with blood line the corridors like macabre decorations. Rooms filled with torture instruments reveal the systematic nature of the cruelty, each device carefully maintained and positioned for maximum effectiveness. But most shocking of all is the discovery of Erzsébet herself. A witness recounts. The Countess stood in her chamber, holding a bloody iron rod, half naked and covered, in blood from head to toe. Her eyes held no recognition of humanity. They were like those of a wild animal, reflecting light, but containing no soul. Around her lay the bodies of 4 young girls, their throats opened, their blood still pooling on the stone floor. The soldiers find detailed records kept by Erzsébet's accomplices, ledgers listing victims by name, age, and method of death, as if cataloging livestock rather than human beings. The meticulous record-keeping suggests a mind that had lost all connection to normal human emotion, treating murder as a business transaction. The investigation that follows reveals the full scope of Erzsébet's crimes. Hundreds of witnesses are interviewed, servants, villagers, survivors, and accomplices. Their testimonies paint a picture of systematic cruelty that shocks even hardened investigators accustomed to the violence of medieval justice. According to official court records, the number of confirmed victims reaches 80. However, witness testimonies and Erzsébet's own records suggest the true number may exceed 650. Some investigators believe the death toll could be even higher, as many victims were likely killed at her other properties or during her travels, their deaths never officially recorded. The trial of Erzsébet's accomplices begins in 1611. Dorottya Szentes and Ilona Joe are found guilty of murder and witchcraft. Their sentences are carried out with medieval brutality. Their fingers are torn off with red-hot pincers before they are thrown alive into a fire. Katerina Benica, judged to have been less involved in the actual murders, is sentenced to life imprisonment. János Ujvari meets a similar fate to the 2 older women, his dwarf status offering no protection from the executioner's justice. But Erzsébet herself presents a legal problem that will define her ultimate fate. As a member of the high nobility, she cannot legally be put on trial without the consent of the Hungarian parliament, which is unlikely to convict one of the country's most powerful landowners. More importantly, executing her would mean that her vast debts to the crown would pass to her heirs, potentially bankrupting the royal treasury. King Matthias and his advisors devise a punishment that avoids these political complications while still ensuring that Erzsébet can never harm anyone again. Rather than execution, she will face something potentially worse: complete isolation from the world, a living death that will serve as both punishment and imprisonment. The sentence is carried out in 1614. Workers arrive at Countess Castle with stones, mortar, and iron bars. Erzsébet is confined to a set of rooms in her own castle, and then the horror of her punishment becomes clear. Every door is walled up with stone, every window is bricked over. The only connection to the outside world is a small slot through which food can be passed, too narrow for anything else to pass through. Erzsébet Báthory, once one of the most powerful women in Europe, is literally buried alive in her own home. Servants report hearing sounds from within, sometimes crying, sometimes laughter, sometimes the sound of scratching on stone walls. Local people claim they can hear her voice at night, calling out for blood, for victims, for the youth that always eluded her grasp. August 21st, 1614. Erzsébet Báthory is found dead in her stone prison at age 54. For 4 years, she had not spoken to another human being, had not seen sunlight, had not breathed fresh air. The servant who discovers her body reports that she appeared to have died while lying on her bed, facing the small food slot, perhaps hoping until the end that someone would come to release her from her living grave. But the story doesn't end with her death, because Erzsébet's legacy raises questions that historians still debate today. Was she truly the monster that legend depicts, or was she a victim of political conspiracy designed to eliminate a powerful creditor and seize her lands? The evidence suggests both possibilities may contain elements of truth. Some modern historians argue that Erzsébet was framed by political enemies who needed to eliminate her influence and cancel the crown's debts to her family. They point to the lack of physical evidence beyond witness testimony, the political benefits that accrued to her enemies after her imprisonment, and the suspicious speed with which her properties were redistributed among the very people who investigated her. Were the numbers of victims deliberately exaggerated? 650 deaths would represent an unprecedented killing spree, requiring a level of organization and secrecy that seems impossible to maintain over decades. Even assuming the lower official count of 80 victims, the systematic nature of the alleged crime official count of 80 victims, the systematic nature of the alleged crime strains credibility when examined through modern forensic understanding.